you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. I am Guillaume Dupuy, and I'm here to present to you my thesis I've been working on this semester at the Center of the Sea of the Federal University of Paraná, titled The Assessment of Different Anesthesia Techniques on Octopus americanus, Paralarvae, with the assistance of my supervisor and promoter, Erika Vidal. So, first, let me introduce you with some background information on studied organism. So paralarvae refers to the early life stage found in octopus and squid. They are produced from small eggs and are recognized as a planktonic post-hatching phase adapted for high dispersal in the environment. In the octopus genera, several morphological features such as the arm length and suckers changes throughout the early life stage of until settlement happens approximately 35 to 60 days after hatching. However, there is a high mortality rate both in nature and rearing conditions, making it a main bottleneck for the successful culture of small egg octopuses in aquaculture. Therefore, considerable research are conducted to improve their well-being, mainly their diet and other physical conditions that they need. In order for these studies to be carried, they have to follow guidelines such as European Directive apply mostly in European Union, which at the time of its adoption included cephalopods for the first time as the first group of invertebrates to be ethically respected. But nowadays, to allow necessary operation and manipulation on cephalopods, the use of anesthesia is mandatory for handling. Many techniques were used, but they were also rejected due to toxicity on subjects and a particularly life stage, and also they were also harmful for the handlers. From the bunch of products that were tested, ethanol and magnesium was the most popular, and they were long time used anesthesia for general anesthesia, and as they appeared to not cause any stress, neither fatality in most cases. However, from these popular choices of anesthesia, only Octopus vulgaris paralarvae were tested so far, since they are the most well-studied early life stage of cephalopods in laboratory conditions. And also, based on some very recent studies, on genetic studies, precisely, it was recently agreed that Octopus vulgaris is not a cosmopolitan species found throughout most oceans, but a species complex in which several species already known and newly included, such as Octopus americanus and many more, as you can see on the screen, were mixed and included along Octopus vulgaris. So, which means that those overlooked species has to be considered and reconsidered in the geographical distributions. And so, for all this, the main aim of this study was to test the effectiveness of different anesthetic agents on Octopus americanus paralarvae. So with this study, we will have like a comparison between the species and Octopus vulgaris done by the first and only recent study done by Scanes et al. Since 2018. And also, this study is to give also some potential recommendation for future study focusing on any paralarvae in order to respect ethical rules applied by European Directive on animal welfare or any other guidelines. So first, it is important to mention that this study followed ethical statements such as a principle of European Directive, as I mentioned in the introduction, the arrived guideline for reporting in vivo experiments in research animals, and as well as a specific guidelines written by Fiorito et al., focusing only on cephalopods ethic. So, Octopus americanus paralarvae were obtained from the spawn of two wild-caught females, both at Bombinas in south of Brazil. After they were captured, they were transferred and maintained in rearing conditions following specific protocols. So females were introduced with males that were already caught before, And so soon after copulation was observed, from this event, egg spawning was first observed 35 days after copulation and lasted for 2 weeks. Then hatching event was first observed 40 days and after spawning and lasted for 5 weeks. And newly hatched paralarvae, 1-2 days old, like were randomly collected from the hatching tanks and used for the experiment. For each experiment trial, approximately 20 paralarvae were carefully transferred for the culture tank to a container filled with filtered seawater. And from there, only 10 active swimming paralarvae that were found at the surface swimming constantly were used in the experiment that I'm going to describe soon. So for the experimental design itself, we used 4 anesthetic. So we use ethanol, magnesium chloride, a mixture of magnesium and ethanol mix, and hypothermia at 10 degrees Celsius. So for the chemical anesthesia, so ethanol, magnesium chloride, and the mixture, they were prepared with filtered and aerated seawater immediately prior to use, and most importantly, different concentration were used based on previous recommendation in studies. And in the case of the hypothermia technique, the hypothermic conditions were created and maintained by using a circulating water cooling system in order for the bath to reach 10 degrees Celsius and to maintain it. Oh, sorry, I forgot. And so all tests excluding hypothermia, yeah, I forgot to mention that temperature and salinity were maintained constantly, and they were also controlled throughout the experiment during the induction and the recovery of the interval, which I will explain just right now. So for each paralarvae, the experiment was as followed. We transferred the paralarvae in the container with an anesthetic treatment. From its transfer to the moment it becomes completely motionless, the induction time is measured. Then we transfer it into a recovery container filled only with aerated seawater at constant temperature and salinity. From that moment, the sedation time is timed until the first movement of the paralarvae and are observed. Then the recovery time is timed from the first movements until the paralarvae are fully returned to normal swimming behavior. And so then we'll have also the total recovery time, which will come later, which is the sedation time plus the recovery time altogether. And also it is noted that the behavior of the paralarvae were recorded and noted. So during recovery as well as 24 hours after the experience. As for the data analysis, for each anesthetic types and time parameters, we had time in mean time, followed by standard deviation, minimum and maximum intervals for overall preview. And in order to get a proper test, we had to test the normality with a Shapiro-Wilk test, as well as a homogeneity check with Leven's test. And since those parameters were all met, we decided to do a one-way nested ANOVA to differentiate each treatment and each concentration within each treatment. And of course, it is to mention that a Turkey post hoc test was also applied to know where the test, the difference were present. Yeah. So now on to the results and the discussion. So overall, from the overall experiment, paralarvae were neither found dead nor in a distressed state during the experiments, and even 24 hours after the experiment. Distress would have been characterized by behaviors such as inking, jetting, and even pigment decoloration change, which were observed. So this is great because that shows once again and proves from other previous study that any technique used here in the study were harmless for the tested individuals. So the first parameter we'd be interested in will be the induction time. For anesthetic, so all along the different parameters, we've settled some recommendation time. So for example, the induction time, we've settled a recommendation time of 200 seconds. But for sure, like the faster the anesthesia is able to immobilize the paralarvae, the better it is. But in order to widen um, the choice of anesthesia, we decided to put this threshold. With this limit settled, only magnesium chloride at 6.8 grams per liter and hypothermia were rejected for having a way too long induction time. But overall, the two relevant techniques were ethanol and the mixture for the lowest induction time. However, from those two, we would say that ethanol would be the best, irrespective of the concentration, in which the fastest induction were found with the highest concentration available at 20 millimeters with a time of like 14 seconds, yeah, as you can see. Now moving on to sedation time, the maximum threshold was settled to a minimum of 3 minutes or 180 seconds. And this was settled to, in order during manipulation and physiological measurement. Sorry, we're going to rephrase. So this time was decided in order to allow possible manipulation and taking physiological measurement while the individual is numb without harming him. So with the paralarvae exposed to hypothermia, we can see at 0, it's pretty much non-existent since no chemical has had long reversal effect. Yeah. However, it wouldn't be suitable for the purpose of physiological measurement, as it would be a hard task to achieve on moving individuals. And this issue can also be pointed out to the lowest concentration of the mixture and ethanol, at the lowest concentration, yeah, ethanol. So like the best time here would be like overall all the concentration with magnesium as well as the 10 millimeter ethanol, yeah. And finally, with the recovery and total recovery time, um, so we settled a threshold of 600 seconds. So as well as for the induction time, so the faster the recovery, the better it is. But remember that we rejected hypothermia because it has a way too long induction time. So yeah, so the thing is, I want to say like hypothermia here has like the shortest recovery time, but still we're not taking that into account. Even like ethanol at 5 milliliter has like a very fast recovery time because like the more concentrated, the more time it takes for. So array, and so I mean, so like from all these parameters that were settled, how do you say? This can be considered to be the first anesthesia test on Octopus americanus paralarvae, since the species has been recently described and separated from its species complex Octopus vulgaris. The condition based on the previous studies that were settled in the study in order to choose the most suitable anesthetic techniques were met in some products. We can cite ethanol and magnesium chloride alone from each other. However, we had to choose the most suitable anesthesia for Octopus vulgaris. And so from all the bunch, we decided to choose ethanol at 10 millimeters per liter. Since like most of the conditions were met, like we have, for example, a quick induction time, enough time given for the necessary manipulation, as well as a fast recovery time. But So now, despite the simplicity of the experiment as it seems, many recommendations can be brought from this study and be applied for future research on similar subjects. For example, different parameters should be taken into account as they may influence the efficiency of some particular techniques the experiment carried successfully. Some particular techniques. So, for example, like if we carry the successive anesthesia on the same individual, we can also have the iron concentration level, which can have an effect on the muscle excitement of the individuals. So different type of anesthesia should be explored and tested, such as isoflurane, a gas type anesthetic that was proven to be effective. Sorry, to be effective on adult octopus. So this is to be explored. For exploring different species of paralarvae of octopus, a similar protocol should be applied, especially to the species that were overlooked before. But also the definition of anesthesia and distress of paralarvae are not clearly developed as compared to the adults and needs more in-depth definition. And since like the study, I mean, not a lot of study on paralarvae anesthesia were done. And finally, I would like also to mention that since the beginning of the study, a focus on the effect of anesthesia on the skin was to be conducted in this study, but hasn't been realized because of restriction caused by COVID-19 crisis. And thus should be realized since those invasive techniques could potentially have a direct effect on the first natural barrier of the paralarvae, thus increasing vulnerability of the individuals against biotic and abiotic factors. And so finally, in the end, I would like to thank my supervisor, Dr. Vidal, for the support and the help given through the TS work. Yeah. And I also like to thank the Federal University of Paraná and the Center of Marine Studies for letting me work at the campus. Thomas Sanborn for carrying out this experiment and collecting data for this project. And last but not least, the IMBRSea coordination team and the program for giving us 2 years of